Throughout the Second World War, there were millions of people who were persecuted inside of the concentration camps and inside of occupied lands. The Third Reich and the Nazis aimed to destroy certain races of people, and also people who held specific religious beliefs and convictions. There were some people inside of German churches that openly supported the Nazis, but there were others who opposed them and the horrific treatment they were instilling onto people. The Nazis saw the church as a dissenting threat at times, as statements of protest were read from the pulpits. But there was one group of people who suffered terribly inside of Nazi Germany, and their fate isn't the most well known. Jehovah's Witnesses would be a problem for Hitler, as they would refuse to perform military service, join Nazi groups and organisations, and refuse to support Hitler and the Nazi Party. It's believed that 10,000 Jehovah's Witnesses were imprisoned, and around 1,200 of these died inside of concentration camps, and 250 were executed. They were the first Christian denomination to be banned by the Nazis, and the most heavily persecuted group of the Christians. But there was one woman who suffered the ultimate fate for her religious beliefs, and she was taken to the execution chamber of Plotzensee Prison, where she was executed by the guillotine. Join us today as we look at the execution of Helene Gotthold, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Helene Gotthold was born on the 31st of December 1896 in Dortmund in Germany. She lived in Herne and Bochum in western Germany, and it's not known what her early life was like. She grew up as a teenager whilst the First World War was erupting, and she then married a coal miner who suffered financial hardship. Between 1927 and 1938, Helene's husband was unemployed, as there were economic issues inside of Germany. But even after Hitler rose to prominence, her husband could not still find work. But the pair were both religious, and they became disillusioned with the German Lutheran Church, and following this they turned towards becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. The couple would regularly attend these church services, and they raised their 2 children according to the way of this also. But as mentioned, Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted heavily by the Nazis. They were attacked for their missionary work, and also they believed their only allegiance was to God and His commandments, and not to political figures or any political party. Before Hitler's time in power, Jehovah's Witnesses had been criticised, and in Bavaria they issued a decree against them, with a police order to confiscate publications made by them. This then increased to other German states, and many people were charged with distributing Jehovah's Witnesses propaganda. But when Hitler became Chancellor, the persecution ramped up, and the Nazi Party's SS stormtroopers raided the homes of witnesses who refused to vote in the November 1933 election over whether Germany should withdraw from the League of Nations. They then marched them under duress to go and vote, and some were badly beaten and forced to hold placards saying they were traitors of the fatherland. In one town, mobs gathered outside their homes and threw stones and chanted, but the Nazis hated them because of their ties towards America also. They linked them to the Jews, and when many witnesses went door to door distributing propaganda and booklets, they were arrested and were sent to prison. Prussia, the biggest German state, imposed a ban saying, "They are obviously involved in agitation against political and religious institution in word and written form." By declaring both institutions as agencies of Satan, they undermine the very foundation of life in the people's community. In their numerous publications, they deliberately and maliciously misrepresent Bible accounts for the purpose of ridiculing state and church institutions. One of the characteristics of their struggle is a fanatical manipulation of their followers. It is therefore obvious that the above-mentioned association needs to be in complete opposition to the present state and its cultural and moral structures. Further demonstrations took place, and many people burned witness leaflets and literature. Jehovah's Witnesses were living under the threat of Gestapo raids, but the punishment they suffered was very serious. From 1933 they were sacked from jobs such as working in post offices, railway stations and other civil service positions, as they refused to give the compulsory Hitler salute. Teachers were also forced to sign a statement confirming they were not members of the church, and if they refused to do so, they were sacked. The state confiscated their motor cars and bicycles, and withdrew their driving licenses, pensions, and also evicted them from their homes. Things got more violent for them from 1936, as Jehovah's Witnesses were beaten with horsewhips daily, and their family members were tortured, and they were threatened with execution by shooting. Sterilisation was also ordered for those who refused to denounce their faith. The Gestapo continued their roundups, and from 1935, the authorities began to send hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses to concentration camps, where they were imprisoned with communists and other political prisoners. In May 1938, they made up 12% of all prisoners at Buchenwald concentration camp. They were forced to wear purple triangles to identify them, and they were subject to very harsh treatment. The SS guards would beat them heavily, whip them and humiliate them. They were also forced to do the dirtiest work, including cleaning toilets, and for refusing to stand to attention and sing Nazi songs they were brutalised. They were also attacked with high-pressure jets of cold water and were tortured. They were forced to pull a full wheelbarrow with their necks whilst crawling on their hands and knees. Others were forced to stand still for an entire day in the hot or cold, and some were stuffed into small closets where they suffocated. They were also subjected to drills and hard work, and then executions were ordered for those specific Jehovah's Witnesses who were very obstinate and could not desert their beliefs, no matter how hard it got. Helene Gotthold and her husband stayed true to their beliefs and religious convictions, and some of their neighbours outcasted them and they refused to speak to them. There was a real danger that someone would tell the Gestapo on them, and this is what happened, as Helene's husband was arrested in 1936. But the Gestapo then returned a year later, and the Gestapo searched her house from top to bottom, and during this the Gestapo agents beat her severely with rods and batons, to the point that Helene, who was pregnant, lost her unborn child. She was then brought to trial, and a judge sentenced her to 18 months imprisonment, but for some reason Helene and her husband were then released from prison, and she was reunited with her children. The family then lived together quietly, keeping their heads down for a few years, but as the Second World War waged on and turned against the Germans, Hitler violently looked inwards inside of Germany and ordered strong action against those who he believed were enemies of the Nazis and were undermining the regime and war effort from within. However, in February 1944, the Nazis ordered the arrest of Helene and her husband yet again. They were accused of illegally holding Bible meetings, undermining the nation's morale, and giving shelter and asylum to men who refused to fight for the Nazis. Helene was accused of opening her house up to other Jehovah's Witnesses who were being hunted. The couple were imprisoned in Essen. However, the prison was attacked and destroyed in an Allied bombing raid, and they were then transferred to a prison in Potsdam. Following a stay behind bars for a number of months, Helene was brought to trial in front of the People's Court. Helene, along with 5 other Jehovah's Witnesses, was screamed at by the Nazi judge for their actions, and it was clear before their trial ended what their sentence would be. Helene and 5 others were sentenced to death for her religious beliefs. It's believed that her husband did survive, but Helene then wrote to him and her children while she was awaiting execution. She was transferred to Berlin's Plotzensee Prison, a place where thousands of people would be executed throughout the Nazis' time in control. The execution chamber there had a hanging beam, where many were killed in the most savage ways, including using piano wire to hang. But inside of the execution chamber there was also a guillotine, or a German foulbile, which was used to execute many people too. The Germans used the guillotine as an efficient method of killing dissenters. Helene Gotthold, on the 18th of December 1944, was taken from her prison cell to the execution chamber. She was led from her cell and was taken into a courtyard where the brick-built execution place was complete, with the executioner's instruments of death. She was greeted by the executioner's assistant, who quickly tied her hands together and then fastened her to a wooden board. She was then taken to the guillotine, where she was rapidly slid under the blade, before an executioner made a few speedy checks, and he then released a sharp blade that fell, beheading Helene Gotthold. Helene Gotthold was a woman who remained true to her religious beliefs, and stayed a Jehovah's Witness, even when she knew how dangerous it was for her to do this. She was executed for hiding other witnesses and for holding illegal Bible meetings. She was one of many people during the Second World War whose execution and story has been forgotten about. But throughout Germany, there were thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses who were persecuted, and many were executed for refusing to conform to the ideas of the Nazi Party. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.